Now let's begin. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen as Jonathan Welch poured his second cup of the morning. At 42, he'd built a comfortable life, a small but successful freelance investigative journalism career, a beautiful home in the suburbs of Portland, and a family he'd thought he knew inside and out. The Sunday morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust particles in its golden rays. "Your father called again," Jonathan said to his wife Holly, watching her reaction carefully. It was a habit he'd developed over the past few months, though he couldn't quite articulate why. Holly looked up from her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers pausing mid-scroll. At 38, she maintained an almost unsettling composure in every situation. Did he say what he wanted? The usual. "Wants you to come by? Says he needs help with some paperwork." Holly's jaw tightened, just for a fraction of a second. "I'll go this afternoon." Their daughter Paige wandered into the kitchen, her 17-year-old face still creased with sleep. She had Jonathan's dark hair and sharp eyes, the kind that missed nothing. "Morning," she mumbled, heading straight for the cereal. Jonathan studied his family at the breakfast table. Holly had her phone out again, typing rapidly. Paige ate in silence, occasionally glancing at her mother with an expression Jonathan couldn't quite read. When had this distance grown between them all? He'd met Holly 8 years ago at a charity gala he'd been covering for a local magazine. She'd been elegant, mysterious, with a past she rarely discussed beyond vague mentions of growing up on the East Coast. Her father, Norman Weber, had moved to Portland 2 years after their marriage, and Jonathan had never warmed to the man. There was something predatory in Norman's pale blue eyes, something calculated in his too-perfect smile. "I was thinking," Jonathan said, breaking the silence. "We should plan a vacation. Just the three of us. Maybe that cabin in Bend we talked about." Holly's response came too quickly. "I can't take time off right now. Work is crazy." Jonathan nodded, filing away her defensive tone. Holly worked in private acquisitions consulting, a job title so vague it bordered on meaningless. When he'd asked for details early in their relationship, she'd laughed it off as boring corporate stuff. He'd stopped asking. But Jonathan hadn't built a career on accepting easy answers. Over 18 years in investigative journalism, he'd exposed corruption in city government, uncovered environmental violations by major corporations, and helped put 3 different officials behind bars. He'd left the daily grind of newspapers 2 years ago to freelance, wanting more time with Paige. Now he specialized in long-form pieces that required deep digging and patience. That same instinct that had led him to buried stories now whispered that something was wrong in his own home. After breakfast, Holly retreated to her home office, a room she kept meticulously locked when not in use. Paige disappeared to her bedroom. Jonathan sat in his study, ostensibly reviewing notes for an article about pharmaceutical pricing, but his mind kept wandering. 3 months ago, Holly had started taking more calls in private. 2 months ago, Norman had shown up at their house at midnight, and Jonathan had heard raised voices before Holly sent him away. 1 month ago, Jonathan had noticed a second phone in Holly's purse, a burner, unlabeled, and always off when he saw it. He'd said nothing. Watching, waiting, was part of his skill set. Rush in too early, and sources scattered. The same principle applied here, though it made his stomach turn to treat his wife like a story to crack. Around noon, Holly emerged from her office dressed for the visit to her father's house. "I'll be back in a few hours," she said, grabbing her keys. Jonathan watched from the window as her silver Lexus pulled out of the driveway. He counted to 60, then walked to Paige's room and knocked. "Come in." His daughter sat on her bed, laptop open, but she wasn't looking at the screen. Her hands trembled slightly. "You okay, kiddo?" Jonathan asked, sitting in her desk chair. Paige looked at him, and he saw fear in her eyes. Real, deep fear that made his chest tighten. "Dad, I need to tell you something. But I'm scared." Jonathan kept his voice calm, the same tone he used with frightened sources. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together." She bit her lip, then closed her laptop and turned fully toward him. "I think Mom is involved in something bad. Really bad." "What makes you say that?" "I've been noticing things. The way she acts with Grandpa Norman. The weird hours. Last week, I heard her on the phone talking about a shipment and cleaning the trail." "Dad, it sounded like, I don't know, like something from a crime show." Jonathan felt his investigative instincts sharpen. "Did you tell her you heard this?" "No. I've been too scared. But Dad, there's more." Paige pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Last night, Mom left her laptop open when she went to shower. I know I shouldn't have, but I looked. I took pictures. She handed him the phone, and Jonathan's blood ran cold as he scrolled through the images. Bank statements under different names. Encrypted email chains discussing packages and routes. Spreadsheets with columns labeled acquisition, transport, and distribution. References to Norman as the coordinator. But the worst was a photo. Norman standing with 3 other men in front of a warehouse, all of them armed. The metadata showed it was taken 6 weeks ago. There's more, Paige whispered. I found a folder labeled JW. That's you, Dad. They have files on you. On your work, your sources, everything. And there was a document. It talked about contingency and loose ends if you became a problem. Jonathan's mind raced. His wife had been documenting him, treating him as a potential threat. When did you find this? He asked. Last night. I couldn't sleep. I've been terrified all morning. I didn't know if I should tell you, if maybe I was overreacting, but then Mom got that call from Norman, and she got this look on her face. Paige's voice cracked. Dad, I'm scared. What if they know I saw? What if? Stop, Jonathan said firmly, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. Listen to me. You did the right thing telling me. Now I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that? Paige nodded, tears streaming down her face. Jonathan pulled her into a hug, his mind already working through scenarios. If Holly and Norman were involved in something criminal, trafficking, money laundering, or worse, and they had files on him, then Paige was right to be afraid. People who operated at that level didn't leave loose ends. And if they suspected Jonathan knew, pack a bag, he said quietly. Essential stuff only. 5 minutes. What? Dad, Paige, listen. If what you found is real, then we can't be here when your mother gets back. We need to get somewhere safe, somewhere public, and figure out our next move. But what if I'm wrong? What if? Then we have an uncomfortable conversation and work through it. But if you're right, Jonathan met his daughter's eyes. Then staying here could be dangerous. For both of us. The weight of that statement hung in the air. Paige wiped her tears and stood. 5 minutes. 4 would be better. While Paige packed, Jonathan moved quickly through the house. He grabbed his laptop, external hard drive with all his work files, and the folder of documents he kept for emergencies, birth certificates, passports, banking information. He stuffed cash from the safe in his study into his pockets, $3,000 he'd kept for emergencies. His hands paused on the photo on his desk. Holly, Paige, and him at the coast last summer. Holly's smile looked perfect, practiced. How had he missed it? No time for that now. Paige appeared with a backpack. Ready. They hurried to Jonathan's car, a practical Honda sedan he'd always preferred over Holly's luxury vehicle. As he backed out of the driveway, he saw their neighbor Steve Henson watering his lawn. Steve waved. Jonathan waved back. Everything normal, nothing to see. 3 blocks away, Paige grabbed his arm. Daddy, we have to run. Now, before they come back. The childhood address, Daddy, not Dad, told Jonathan everything about how frightened she was. We are running, sweetheart. To the police station. We'll show them what you found, make a report, and... No. Paige's grip tightened. You don't understand. Look at this. She thrust her phone at him. At a red light, Jonathan looked at the screen. It showed a text message thread she'd screenshotted from Holly's laptop. Recent, from this morning. Norman, package secure. Timing. Holly, after I return from your place. He's suspicious. We need to move up the timeline. Norman, the girl? Holly, included. Clean sweep. No traces. Norman, confirmed. Team ready. The light turned green. A car honked behind them. Jonathan's hands tightened on the wheel as he accelerated, his mind crystallizing around one horrifying fact. His wife and her father were planning to kill him and Paige. How did you get this? He asked, his voice surprisingly steady. I set up a sync to my phone yesterday, just to monitor. I didn't think. I hoped I was wrong. Paige's voice broke. Jonathan took a sharp turn toward downtown Portland. You weren't wrong, and you just saved our lives. The police station loomed ahead, a brick building that promised safety and answers. Jonathan parked in the visitor lot, and they practically ran inside, Paige clutching her phone like a lifeline. The officer at the front desk, a middle-aged woman named Officer Raquel Townsend according to her nameplate, looked up with professional boredom that shifted to concern when she saw their faces. We need to report an immediate threat, Jonathan said, his journalist training kicking in. Clear, concise, credible. My wife and her father are planning to harm us. We have evidence. Officer Townsend straightened. Come with me. They were led to a small interview room. Jonathan laid out everything. The suspicious behavior, the files Paige had found, the messages. He showed the officer the photos on Paige's phone. Townsend's expression grew darker as she scrolled. She excused herself, returning 10 minutes later with a detective, a lean man in his 50s named Curtis Donovan. Mr. Welch, Detective Donovan said, sitting across from them. These are serious allegations. I'm going to need to verify some information. Your wife's full name. Holly Weber Welch. Donovan typed into his laptop. His eyebrows rose slightly. He typed more, then stood abruptly. Excuse me. He was gone for 20 minutes. Jonathan and Paige sat in tense silence, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. When Donovan returned, he had 3 other officers with him. Mr. Welch, I need to ask you some questions about your wife. When you married her, did you see her birth certificate? Social security card? We got married in a small ceremony in Vegas. She had her driver's license, her social security card. What? Donovan turned his laptop around. On the screen was a driver's license photo of Holly, but the name read Heather Compton. Your wife, Donovan said carefully, is not who she claims to be. The social security number associated with Holly Weber belongs to a woman who died in a car accident in 2009 in Connecticut. The real Holly Weber was 22 when she died. Jonathan felt the room tilt. What? Heather Compton is wanted in 3 states for wire fraud, money laundering, and suspected involvement in a cargo theft ring. She's been using dead people's identities for over a decade. And her father, Norman Weber, real name Norman Collier, is the head of a criminal organization that specializes in high-value cargo theft and distribution. They've been on federal watch lists for 6 years. Paige made a small, hurt sound. Jonathan put his arm around her. We've been trying to build a case against them for years, Donovan continued. But they're careful. Very careful. Mr. Welch, I need to know, did your wife ever show unusual interest in your work? Your sources. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. I'm an investigative journalist. 2 years ago, I was looking into a series of pharmaceutical thefts from warehouses along the I-5 corridor. I never finished the piece, got pulled in another direction by an editor. That was them, Donovan said. We suspected, but couldn't prove it. Mr. Welch, I think your wife married you to keep tabs on you, to make sure you never got close to their operation. Jonathan felt sick. 8 years. 8 years of his life had been a lie. Every kiss, every I love you, every moment he'd believed was real, all of it a calculated con. But Paige was real. Paige was his, and they'd been planning to kill her. The sickness turned to cold, focused rage. What happens now? Jonathan asked. We place you and your daughter in protective custody. We use the evidence she gathered to get warrants. And we bring them down. Jonathan shook his head. Not good enough. Donovan frowned. Mr. Welch, they've been operating for 6 years that you know of, using my wife as a plant as a spy. If you raid them now, they'll lawyer up, and the evidence a 17-year-old girl took from an unlocked laptop won't hold up. Their organization will scatter, regroup, and you'll be back to square one. What are you suggesting? Jonathan leaned forward, the same intensity that had made him a formidable journalist now focused on a singular purpose. I'm suggesting you let me help. I have access they trust, or did. My wife thinks I'm oblivious. Use that. Let me get you real evidence. The kind that puts them away for life. Absolutely not. You're a civilian, and... Detective Donovan. Jonathan's voice cut like steel. These people stole 8 years of my life. They were going to murder my daughter. I'm not asking for permission to go rogue. I'm offering to work with you, under your supervision, to get justice. Because right now, you have screenshots and suspicions. I can get you confessions, transaction records, everything you need. I've been doing this kind of work for 18 years. Donovan studied him. You understand if you do this, there's significant risk? I understand that my wife, sorry, Heather Compton, is a criminal who was planning to kill me and my child. I understand that her father runs a criminal empire. And I understand that I'm the only one positioned to bring them both down from the inside. Paige grabbed his hand. Dad, is this safe? Jonathan looked at his daughter, seeing the fear and trust warring in her eyes. No, he said honestly. But neither is running for the rest of our lives. These people need to pay for what they've done, and I'm going to make sure they do. Detective Donovan exchanged glances with Officer Townsend, then pulled out his phone. I need to make a call. This goes above my pay grade. As Donovan stepped out, Jonathan sat back in the hard plastic chair. His whole life had been a lie, a fiction created to control him. But lies could be weaponized. Fictions could be rewritten. And Jonathan Welch had always been very good at telling stories. The difference was, this time the story would end with the villains exactly where they belonged, and he would make certain they understood, completely and totally, what it meant to underestimate him. The safe house smelled of stale coffee and old carpets. Jonathan sat at a folding table covered in files, surveillance photos, and his laptop, while federal agents moved quietly through the rooms around them. It had been 4 hours since they'd fled to the police station, and the world had transformed into something unrecognizable. Agent Victoria Rice of the FBI's Organized Crime Division had arrived an hour after Donovan's phone call. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who'd been tracking the Collier organization, as she insisted on calling it, for 3 years. Your wife is good, Rice had said, spreading photos across the table. One of the best identity thieves we've tracked. She doesn't just steal names from the dead, she becomes them. Bank accounts, credit history, social media presence going back years. Holly Weber's entire existence was fabricated in under 6 months. Now, as evening shadows stretched across the safe house, Jonathan studied the organizational chart Rice had created. Norman Collier sat at the top. With Heather, he couldn't think of her as Holly anymore, as his right hand. Below them, a network of 24 associates handled everything from warehouse surveillance to transportation to money laundering. They specialize in high-value pharmaceutical theft, Rice explained. Cancer medications, specialty drugs, anything with a big black market value. They steal from warehouses, distribution centers, even directly from manufacturers. Then they sell overseas or through corrupt pharmacy chains. We estimate they've moved over $50 million in stolen goods in the past 3 years alone. Paige sat on a worn couch nearby, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm evening. She hadn't said much since they'd arrived. Jonathan kept checking on her, seeing his own shock mirrored in her face. The question, Rice continued, is how to proceed. Your wife will expect you home eventually. When you don't show, she'll know something's wrong. She'll call my phone, Jonathan said. I should answer. Act normal. If she's planning to kill you, normal might not be enough. She'll be suspicious of any deviation from pattern. Jonathan thought about that. 8 years of marriage meant Heather knew his patterns intimately. Sunday evenings they usually ordered takeout and watched movies. He always answered his phone within 3 rings. He hated surprises. He could use that. What if I don't deviate, he said slowly. What if I go back? Absolutely not, Rice said immediately. Hear me out. She doesn't know what Paige found. The laptop wasn't supposed to be accessible. Paige got lucky with timing. If I show up acting like nothing's wrong, Heather won't suspect. She'll think she has time to plan, to execute whatever clean sweep she was discussing with Norman. And you'll be in the house with a woman planning to murder you. I'll be in the house gathering evidence. I know where she keeps her files, her computers. I know her patterns too. If we're going to build an airtight case, we need more than screenshots. We need hard evidence, physical evidence that will hold up in court. Detective Donovan, who'd stayed for the federal briefing, shook his head. This is insane. You'd be putting yourself in immediate danger. I'd be wearing a wire. You'd have surveillance. And I'd be doing exactly what I've done for 18 years, getting close to people who don't want their secrets exposed and making them talk. Rice studied him with unsettling intensity. You understand the psychology here? Your wife spent 8 years with you. She knows how you think, how you react. If you slip up even once, then you pull me out. But I won't slip up. Jonathan's voice was hard. I've interviewed murderers, con artists, corrupt politicians. I know how to play a role. And I have motivation they never had. I want these people destroyed. Dad, Paige said quietly. Everyone turned to her. This is because of me, isn't it? Because I found the files. Jonathan went to sit beside her. This is because your mother is a criminal who was planning to hurt us. You saved us, Paige. Now I need to finish what you started. But what if something happens to you? Then you have Agent Rice and an entire FBI team protecting you. But nothing's going to happen because I'm going to be smarter than them. I'm going to get the evidence we need, and I'm going to make sure Heather and Norman spend the rest of their lives in prison. Rice pulled out her phone. I need to run this up the chain. If, and that's a big if, we authorize this, you'd be operating under strict protocols. Daily check-ins, constant surveillance, panic codes. The moment we sense real danger, we extract you. Understood. As Rice stepped away to make calls, Donovan sat across from Jonathan. You're really willing to go back to that house? Sleep next to a woman you know is planning to kill you. Jonathan looked at the photos spread across the table. Heather smiling at a charity event, Norman shaking hands with a city council member, warehouses marked with red circles. Curtis, my entire marriage was a lie. Every moment, every memory, carefully constructed to control me. She looked me in the eye every day and lied. She let me fall in love with a person who doesn't exist. He paused, then added quietly, the only real thing that came from that marriage is Paige. And they were going to kill her like she was nothing. Like she was just a loose end to clean up. So yes, I'm willing to go back to that house. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Revenge is a bad motivator for undercover work. This isn't revenge. Revenge is emotional, sloppy. This is justice. And I'm very good at my job. Rice returned an hour later with authorization and a stark warning. You have 1 week. 1 week to gather evidence. Make them talk. Get us what we need. After that, we move regardless. The longer you're in there, the higher the risk they detect something's wrong. 1 week is plenty. They spent the next 3 hours preparing. A technical team fitted Jonathan with a sophisticated wire, not the bulky devices from movies, but a nearly invisible piece of technology embedded in a shirt button that would transmit everything within a 20-foot radius. Rice coached him on what to look for, what questions to ask, how to steer conversations toward confession without seeming obvious. Remember, she said, people like Heather are expert manipulators. She'll be watching for any change in your behavior. You need to be the same man who left that house this morning. Skeptical maybe, a little distant like you've been for months, but not suspicious. Not afraid. Jonathan nodded, committing it all to memory. At 8 p.m., he hugged Paige goodbye. She clung to him, and he felt her shaking. I'll call you every day, he promised. Agent Rice will keep you updated. And in 1 week, this will all be over. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. And Paige. He pulled back to look at her. What you did today, finding that evidence, telling me, that took incredible courage. You saved both our lives. Don't ever forget that. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. As Jonathan drove back toward the house he'd called home for 8 years, he felt an eerie calm settle over him. This was just another investigation, another story to crack. The only difference was the subject of his investigation slept beside him every night. Had slept beside him. Past tense. He pulled into the driveway at 8:47 p.m., exactly when he'd normally return from an evening errand. The lights were on inside. Heather's car sat in its usual spot. Jonathan grabbed the bag of takeout he'd stopped for, Thai food from their usual place, extra spring rolls like always, and walked to the front door. His hand was steady as he unlocked it. Heather looked up from the couch, where she sat with her laptop. Her face transformed into a smile that had once made his heart race, and now made his skin crawl. There you are? I was starting to worry. Where's Paige? Jonathan set down the food, keeping his expression mildly sheepish. Sleepover at the Mathis house. Helen called this afternoon. I guess I forgot to mention it. You know how teenage girls are. It was a lie they'd rehearsed. Paige's friend Helen Mathis and her mother Esther were real, and the Mathis family had been briefed by the FBI. If Heather checked, Esther would confirm the sleepover story. Oh. Something flickered in Heather's eyes. Was it relief? Suspicion? Jonathan couldn't tell. You could have texted me. Sorry, you know me and my phone. He gestured to the takeout. I got dinner. Thought we could have a quiet evening. Just us. Heather closed her laptop and stood, moving toward him with that practiced grace. She kissed him, and Jonathan forced himself not to flinch, not to think about the text messages discussing his murder. That sounds perfect, she said. I've missed having you to myself. As they sat down to eat, Jonathan asked about her visit to Norman, keeping his tone casual, bored even. Heather described her father's health issues, some paperwork about his house, the usual mundane details. She was good. Her lies flowed smooth as silk. But Jonathan was better. Over pad thai and spring rolls, he began planting seeds. You know, I've been thinking about that pharmaceutical theft story I started a couple years ago. The one I dropped. Heather's chopsticks paused for just a fraction of a second. The warehouse thing? Yeah. I ran into an old source today at the coffee shop. You remember Tim Golden from the DA's office? He mentioned there's been a new wave of thefts. Bigger, more sophisticated. Said it might be worth revisiting. I thought you were focused on the environmental piece. I am, but this could be bigger. Tim said the FBI's involved now, that they think it's organized crime. Jonathan watched her face carefully. Could be a major story. Heather set down her chopsticks, her expression concerned. Jonathan, honey, you know how I feel about you taking on dangerous stories. Organized crime? That's not worth the risk. Since when do you worry about my stories being dangerous? Since always. I don't like the idea of you poking around criminals. I've done it before. This seems different. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Her touch made his stomach turn. Promise me you'll think carefully before diving into this one. For me? For Paige. The irony was so thick Jonathan almost laughed. Instead, he squeezed her hand and lied right back. Of course. You're right. It's probably not worth the trouble. Heather relaxed visibly. Thank you. They finished dinner making small talk, and Jonathan played his role perfectly, the slightly distracted husband, the man who noticed nothing, the easy mark. When Heather excused herself to take a phone call in her office, Jonathan cleared the dishes and thought about the wire transmitting everything to the FBI team parked 3 blocks away. One down. 6 days to go. That night, lying in bed next to a woman who'd planned his death, Jonathan stared at the ceiling and planned his next move. Heather's office was the key. Inside was her real laptop, the one Paige had accessed, along with hard files she kept in a locked drawer. He needed access to both. Around 2 a.m., when Heather's breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of sleep, Jonathan carefully extracted himself from bed. He'd always been a light sleeper, a chronic insomniac, one of the few truths Heather actually knew about him. He could claim a restless night if she woke. The hallway was dark as he padded toward her office. The door was locked, as always, but Jonathan had learned to pick basic locks in his 20s while investigating a landlord scam. It took him 45 seconds to get inside. The office was pristine. Heather's laptop sat closed on the desk, an external hard drive beside it. Jonathan pulled out the thumb drive Rice had given him, a device that would clone the entire contents of any computer it was plugged into. He opened the laptop. Password protected, of course. But Paige had mentioned her mother left it open after showering last night, which meant it had an auto-lock timeout rather than requiring password at wake. Jonathan pressed the power button and watched the screen illuminate. 5 minutes. That's how long Rice said the cloning would take. As the progress bar slowly filled, Jonathan photographed the contents of Heather's desk with his phone. Business cards, a ledger with cryptic notations, receipts from unusual locations. When the cloning finished, he turned his attention to the locked drawer. This lock was more sophisticated. It took Jonathan 3 minutes of careful work before he heard the click. Inside, 3 burner phones, 2 passports under different names with Heather's photo, and a thick folder labeled contingencies. Jonathan's hands trembled as he opened it. The first document was a dossier on him. Every story he'd written in the past decade, every source he'd cultivated, a psychological profile that noted his persistent nature and inability to let things go. The file concluded, subject remains unaware of operation. Recommend continued monitoring. If compromise occurs, implement Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was detailed on the next page. The words clean sweep and eliminate witnesses appeared multiple times. Jonathan photographed everything, his rage building with each click. Finally, he found what he needed, a ledger connecting Norman's name to specific warehouse thefts, complete with dates, inventory stolen, and buyers. It was a roadmap of their entire operation. He was photographing the last page when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Jonathan moved fast, shoving the folder back, closing the drawer, pocketing the thumb drive. By the time the door opened, he was standing by the window, looking out at the dark street. Jonathan. Heather's voice was sharp with suspicion. What are you doing in here? He turned, letting concern cross his face. I couldn't sleep. Thought I heard something outside. Did I wake you? Heather's eyes scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. Jonathan had been careful, but had he been careful enough? How did you get in? The door was locked. No, it wasn't. It was cracked open. I always lock it. Maybe you forgot tonight. Jonathan moved toward her, keeping his body language relaxed. Is everything okay? You seem tense. For a long moment, Heather studied him. Jonathan held her gaze, letting nothing show. Finally, she nodded. Sorry, I'm just worried about Dad. He hasn't been feeling well. We should get back to bed, Jonathan said, guiding her out of the office. As she locked the door behind them, he noticed her hands were shaking slightly. She suspected something. Not what? Not yet, but something. Back in bed, Jonathan lay still, counting his heartbeats until Heather's breathing deepened again. When he was certain she slept, he allowed himself a small smile. He had what he needed. The photos, the cloned hard drive, the evidence that would bury them both. Tomorrow he'd pass it all to Rice, and they could start building the case. But Jonathan wasn't done yet. Evidence was important, but he wanted something more. He wanted Heather and Norman to understand exactly what they'd done, exactly who they'd underestimated. He wanted them to see their empire collapse and know that Jonathan Welch, the oblivious husband, the easy mark, had orchestrated every moment of their destruction. For that, he needed a different kind of plan. And as dawn broke over Portland, painting the bedroom in shades of gold and amber, Jonathan Welch began crafting the perfect trap. The coffee shop on Morrison Street was crowded with Monday morning regulars. Jonathan sat in a back corner booth, his laptop open to a document that looked like article notes, but was actually a secure chat with Agent Rice. The cloned hard drive and photos had been delivered during his morning run, passed to an agent jogging past him in the park. Rice, evidence is solid. We can move for warrants today. Jonathan, not yet. I need more time. Rice, why? We have enough to build a prosecution. Jonathan, you have enough to charge them. I want enough to ensure they never see daylight again. There was a pause before Rice's next message appeared. Rice, what are you planning? Jonathan, trust me. 2 more days. I can get you a confession on tape. Rice, that's a risk. Heather's suspicious after last night. Jonathan, which is why I need to give her something else to focus on. Jonathan closed the chat and opened his legitimate email. He'd spent the early morning hours reaching out to sources from his pharmaceutical theft investigation 2 years ago, the one he'd abandoned when Heather had subtly discouraged it. Now he was reviving it with deliberate noise. His phone buzzed. Heather. Hey, he answered, keeping his tone normal. Where are you? I woke up and you were gone. Coffee shop. Working on that pharma theft story I mentioned. Tim sent me some leads and I got excited. He paused. I know you said it might be dangerous, but I think I can approach it carefully. Silence. Then, I thought we agreed you'd think about it first. I did think about it. All night, actually. That's why I couldn't sleep. Holly, this could be huge. Organized crime, millions in stolen drugs. It's exactly the kind of investigative piece that could win awards. More silence. Jonathan could practically hear the calculations happening on the other end of the line. We should talk about this in person, Heather finally said. I'll be home in an hour. Jonathan ended the call and immediately sent another message to Rice. She's rattled. Expect her to contact Norman today. Make sure you're monitoring all communications. Rice, already on it. Be careful. An hour later, Jonathan walked into his house to find Heather in the kitchen with Norman. The older man sat at the counter, his pale eyes fixed on Jonathan with an intensity that would have been frightening if Jonathan hadn't already decided these people were going to pay for everything they'd done. Jonathan, Norman said, his voice smooth. Holly tells me you're working on a new story. Something about pharmaceutical thefts. That's right. Jonathan poured himself coffee, deliberately casual. It's been bothering me that I never finished the piece 2 years ago. Feels like unfinished business. Dangerous business, Norman said. These organized crime types, they don't appreciate journalists poking around. I've dealt with dangerous people before. Have you? Norman's smile was cold. I wonder if you really understand what you might be getting into. It was a threat, barely veiled. Jonathan met his eyes. I've exposed corrupt politicians, environmental criminals, fraud schemes. I think I can handle some drug thieves. Heather moved between them, her hand on Jonathan's arm. Sweetheart, I'm just worried. What if these people find out you're investigating them? What if they come after you? After us? Why would they even know? I'm careful with my sources, careful with my research. Unless... Jonathan let confusion cross his face. Why are you both so worried about this specific story? We're not. Heather said too quickly. We just care about you. Norman stood, moving closer. He was a big man, 6'3" and broad-shouldered. The implied threat was clear. Jonathan, I've lived in this city a long time. I hear things. And what I hear is that these pharmaceutical theft rings are connected to some very dangerous people. The kind who make problems disappear. Jonathan held his ground. Are you threatening me, Norman? I'm warning you. As family. The word family, coming from Norman's mouth, made Jonathan want to laugh. Instead, he nodded slowly. I appreciate the concern. Really. But I'm going to pursue this story. It's important. He could see the rage flash in Norman's eyes, quickly controlled. Heather's grip on his arm tightened. Let's talk privately, she said to Jonathan, pulling him toward the living room. Once they were alone, Heather's perfect mask cracked slightly. What are you doing? My job. This isn't just any story, Jonathan. These people. What people, Holly? You seem to know an awful lot about a criminal organization I just started investigating. She stopped, realizing her mistake. I don't know anything specific. I worry. Do you? Jonathan stepped closer, letting some of his real anger show. Because lately I've been wondering if you worry about anything real. You're always so controlled, so perfect. Sometimes I wonder if I actually know you at all. It was the truth, delivered as an accusation. Heather's eyes widened. Of course you know me. I'm your wife. Are you? Because my wife would trust me to do my job. My wife would support me, not try to scare me off a story with vague warnings about danger. I'm trying to protect you. From what? Jonathan demanded. What exactly are you trying to protect me from, Holly? She opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time in 8 years, Jonathan saw her genuinely uncertain. It was a crack in her armor, and he filed it away for later use. Norman appeared in the doorway. I should go? Think about what I said, Jonathan. Some stories aren't worth pursuing. After Norman left, the house felt heavy with tension. Heather retreated to her office, and Jonathan heard her on the phone. Low, urgent conversations that his wire would be picking up clearly. That afternoon, Agent Rice sent an encrypted message. We got it. Heather called Norman 6 times. They're planning to handle the situation before you get too deep. Norman mentioned moving up their timeline. This is escalating fast. Jonathan, good. Let them escalate. I'm ready. Rice, what's the plan? Jonathan, I'm going to offer them exactly what they want. A chance to stop me permanently. But on my terms, in my trap. Rice, explain. Jonathan, Norman's having a charity gala Thursday night at his estate. Big donors, city officials, the whole show. I'm going to tell Heather I have a breakthrough on the story, that I'm meeting a source who can expose everything. I'm going to make them desperate enough to act. Rice, that's insane. If they try to kill you. Jonathan, they won't. Not at the gala with witnesses. But they'll make plans, they'll talk, and your surveillance will catch everything. Then Friday morning, we spring the trap. We bring them down in front of everyone who thought they were respectable citizens. Rice, this is way beyond what we authorized. Jonathan, this is me finishing what Heather started when she decided to make my life a lie. Trust me, Victoria. I know what I'm doing. There was a long pause before Rice responded. You have until Friday morning. Not a minute longer. And Jonathan, don't get yourself killed. Your daughter needs her father. The mention of Paige steadied Jonathan's resolve. He'd called her every evening from a secure line, assuring her he was safe, that everything was going according to plan. Each time, she asked when he was coming back. Each time, he promised soon. That evening, Jonathan made dinner while Heather watched him with barely concealed suspicion. Over chicken and vegetables, he dropped the bomb he'd been preparing all day. I had an interesting call this afternoon, he said casually. From a warehouse manager out in Gresham. Guy says he has documents proving who's been behind the pharmaceutical thefts. Names, dates, everything. Heather's fork clattered against her plate. What? I know, right? Apparently, he's been documenting everything for years, waiting for the right moment to come forward. He's willing to meet with me. When? Friday morning. Early, before his shift. Says it has to be then or never. He's leaving town, too scared to stay. Jonathan watched Heather's face cycle through emotions. Shock, fear, calculation. You can't meet him. Why not? Because it could be a trap. What if this guy is working for the criminals, trying to lure you out? Then I'll be careful. I'll meet him in a public place. Jonathan, please. Heather's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine desperation. Please don't do this. I have a bad feeling. You have a bad feeling about everything lately. Jonathan stood, carrying his plate to the sink. I'm meeting him Friday. This is the biggest break I've had in years. I'm not walking away. That night, Heather made 3 phone calls from her office. Jonathan couldn't hear the words, but he could hear the tone. Urgent, frightened, angry. The wire caught everything. Rice, she's calling Norman. They're discussing Friday morning and preventing exposure. Norman wants to intercept you before the meeting. Heather's arguing for a different approach. Jonathan, let me know what they decide. Rice, are you sure about this? We can bring them in now, prevent whatever they're planning. Jonathan, and let them claim they were just worried family members? Let their lawyers argue down every charge? No, I want them caught in the act, on tape, with no possible defense. Rice, you sound like a man with a death wish. Jonathan, I sound like a man who wants justice. Wednesday night, Jonathan barely slept. He could feel the tension building, the trap closing. Heather lay beside him, and he knew she was awake too, both of them pretending sleep while planning their next moves. Thursday morning brought the charity gala preparation. Norman's annual fundraiser for youth literacy programs, a perfect facade for a criminal. Heather spent the day getting ready, her movements sharp with stress. You're still going to the gala, right? She asked. Of course. Wouldn't miss your father's big night. The estate was lit up like Christmas when they arrived that evening. Norman's house sprawled across 3 acres in the West Hills, all glass and angles, an expensive taste funded by stolen pharmaceuticals. Jonathan shook hands with city council members, chatted with donors, played the supportive son-in-law while his wife and her father exchanged loaded glances across the room. During dinner, Norman made a speech about the importance of education and giving back to the community. The irony was so thick Jonathan could taste it. He applauded with everyone else, his journalist's eye cataloging every face, every conversation, storing it all for the articles he'd write once this was over. After dessert, Norman pulled Jonathan aside to a private study. We need to talk, the old man said, closing the door. About what? About this story you're pursuing. About Friday morning. Jonathan feigned surprise. How do you know about Friday? Holly's worried sick. She told me everything. Norman poured 2 glasses of scotch, handed one to Jonathan. I've done some asking around, Jonathan, about this warehouse manager you're meeting. And I think you should reconsider. This could be dangerous. You keep saying that. What? Norman's mask of concern slipped, revealing something cold underneath. Because some things are better left uninvestigated. Some stories will only get you hurt. Is that a threat? It's advice. From someone who cares about his daughter's happiness. Losing you would devastate Holly. Jonathan sipped the scotch, let the burn ground him. If something happened to me, she'd inherit everything. The house, my savings, my life insurance. She'd be fine. The words hung in the air. Norman's eyes narrowed. That's a morbid thought. Is it? I'm just being practical. Holly would be very comfortable if I wasn't around. You both would. Jonathan could see Norman processing this, trying to determine if Jonathan was suspicious or simply making conversation. The wire hidden in his jacket would be catching every word. Nevertheless, Norman said carefully, I'd hate to see anything happen to you. Your family. So you keep saying. Tell me, Norman, what exactly do you do for a living? The question clearly surprised him. I'm a consultant. For what? Various businesses. Import-export, mostly. Pharmaceuticals? Norman's expression froze. Sometimes. What? Just curious. It occurred to me that your consulting business and these pharmaceutical thefts might intersect. Professionally speaking, the room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Norman set down his glass with deliberate care. That's quite an accusation. It's an observation. Jonathan met his eyes. See, I've been doing research. Looking into shipping records, warehouse inventories, patterns of theft. And I keep seeing the same names pop up. Shell companies, holding corporations. A lot of them trace back to an address that looks suspiciously like this one. Norman's face went completely blank, a bad sign in someone usually so expressive. You've been investigating me? I've been investigating a story. If you're part of it, that's just inconvenient coincidence. Or perhaps, Norman said slowly, you've been more aware than we thought. The slip was intentional, Jonathan was sure of it. Norman was testing him, trying to gauge how much he knew. We? Jonathan asked innocently. Norman smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Jonathan had ever seen. Holly and I, we've been trying to protect you from your own curiosity, but it seems you're determined to dig yourself into a hole. or dig up the truth. The truth can be fatal, Jonathan, especially when it concerns people who have significant investments in keeping certain activities quiet. Are you admitting to criminal activity? I'm admitting to nothing. I'm simply observing that journalists who ask too many questions sometimes meet unfortunate ends. Car accidents. Muggings gone wrong. House fires. Jonathan felt ice slide down his spine, but kept his voice steady. Is that what you're planning for me? An unfortunate accident. I'm planning to protect my daughter's happiness. If that means protecting you from yourself, so be it. And if I don't cooperate? Norman's smile widened. Then I suppose Holly becomes a very wealthy widow. Either way, this story of yours ends Friday morning. There it was, the threat, clear and recorded. Jonathan set down his own glass. We should get back to the party, he said. Yes, Norman agreed. We should. Enjoy the evening, Jonathan. It might be your last as a free man. Is that what you're offering? A chance to walk away. I'm offering you a choice. Drop the story, forget what you think you know, and life continues as normal. Or pursue it, and face the consequences. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Jonathan left the study with his heart pounding, but his mind clear. The wire had caught everything. The thinly veiled threats, the admission of criminal connections, Norman's cold willingness to murder, if necessary. He found Heather in the ballroom, laughing with a group of donors. She saw him and her expression shifted, a question, an uncertainty. He nodded slightly, and she relaxed. She thought he'd been warned off. Thought Norman had scared him straight. They had no idea what was coming. On the drive home, Heather was almost cheerful. Did you and Dad have a good talk? Very illuminating, Jonathan said. He made his position quite clear. And I'm thinking about what he said. Relief flooded her features. I'm so glad. I was so worried about you, about this whole situation. Maybe we can put it behind us now. Maybe, Jonathan agreed. That night, lying in bed, Heather curled against him, the first time in months she'd initiated contact. Jonathan let her, even though his skin crawled at the touch. I love you, she whispered. 3 words she'd said 1,000 times. 3 words that had never been true. I know, Jonathan replied, because he couldn't bring himself to lie the same way she had. Friday morning came with gray skies and the promise of rain. Jonathan dressed in his usual jeans and jacket, pocketed his phone and wallet, and kissed Heather goodbye. Be careful today, she said, her eyes searching his face. Always am. He drove toward Gresham, toward the warehouse where he'd told them he was meeting his fictitious source. He knew they'd be following. Surveillance had spotted 2 of Norman's men picking up his tail within 3 blocks. But Jonathan wasn't going to the warehouse. At the last minute, he took a sharp turn toward the address Rice had given him, a federal building downtown, surrounded by agents and witnesses and cameras. In his rearview mirror, he saw the tail car brake hard, try to follow. Too late. Jonathan pulled into the underground garage where Agent Rice waited with a full tactical team. It's done, he said, handing over the wire. You have everything you need. Rice nodded grimly. Arrest warrants are already issued. Teams are moving on Norman's estate and your house simultaneously. Heather's still at home, being taken into custody as we speak, along with 6 of their associates. Jonathan, what you did, it was reckless and dangerous, but it worked. The recordings from last night, the financial evidence you gathered, it's all enough. They're going away for a very long time. Jonathan felt the weight of the past week crash over him. I want to see Paige. She's waiting upstairs. The reunion with his daughter was tearful and relieved. Paige threw herself into his arms, and Jonathan held her like he'd never let go. It's over, she asked. Almost. The federal courthouse was packed with media when Heather and Norman's trial began 6 months later. Jonathan sat in the gallery with Paige, watching as the prosecution laid out the case. Pharmaceutical thefts totaling over $80 million, identity fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and a dozen other charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, surveillance footage, the cloned hard drive from Heather's computer, and most damning of all, the recordings from Norman's study and various phone calls where they discussed eliminating Jonathan and Paige. Heather's lawyer tried to claim she'd been manipulated by her father, that she was a victim too. But the texts discussing Jonathan's murder in cold, calculated terms destroyed that defense. The real Holly Weber's family gave emotional testimony about having their daughter's identity stolen and used for criminal purposes. Norman showed no emotion throughout the trial. He sat rigid and cold, his pale eyes occasionally finding Jonathan in the crowd. Each time, Jonathan stared back, unwavering. When it was his turn to testify, Jonathan took the stand and told the truth. All of it. The 8-year marriage built on lies. The discovery of Heather's real identity. The fear for his daughter's life. The decision to go back undercover and gather evidence. "Why did you take such a risk?" the prosecutor asked. Jonathan looked at Heather. "Because they needed to understand that they'd underestimated me. They thought I was an easy mark, someone they could control and eventually dispose of. They thought I'd never figure it out. I needed them to know they were wrong. I needed them to face justice for everything they'd done, not just to me and my daughter, but to all their victims over the years." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Norman Collier was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. At 72, it was effectively a life sentence. Heather Compton received 35 years. Her lawyer's final argument for leniency, that she truly loved Jonathan despite the circumstances, fell flat when the prosecution played the recording of her discussing how to stage his death as a home invasion. As the bailiffs led them away, Heather looked back at Jonathan one last time. Her perfect mask was finally gone, replaced with raw hatred and disbelief. She'd truly thought she was smarter, that she'd never be caught. Jonathan didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply watched her disappear through the door and felt the weight of 8 years finally lift from his shoulders. Outside the courthouse, media surrounded Jonathan. He gave a brief statement about justice being served and how grateful he was to the FBI and local police. He thanked the jury for their careful deliberation. He didn't mention revenge. He didn't need to. The articles he wrote about the case won him the investigative journalism award he'd always wanted. But more importantly, they exposed the full scope of the pharmaceutical theft ring, leading to additional arrests and the recovery of millions in stolen medications. A year later, Jonathan stood in the kitchen of a new house, smaller than the old one. But there's in a way the other place never had been. Paige was applying to colleges, talking about studying law or journalism. The trauma of that year had shaped her, but hadn't broken her. "Dad," she called from the living room. "There's someone at the door." Jonathan opened it to find Agent Victoria Rice, now wearing civilian clothes and holding a bottle of wine. "Thought I'd check on you both," she said. "See how you're settling in." Over dinner, they talked about everything except the case. Paige told stories about school. Rice shared anecdotes about her daughter's soccer team. It was normal, comfortable, real. Later, after Paige had gone to bed and Rice was preparing to leave, she paused at the door. "You know, what you did was insane," she said. "Going back into that house, confronting Norman, setting yourself up as bait." "I know, but it worked. We've been chasing the Collier organization for years. You handed them to us on a silver platter. I had good motivation." Rice studied him. "How are you really doing?" Jonathan considered the question. "I'm angry. Probably will be for a long time. 8 years of my life were a lie. Every moment, every memory with her, tainted. But I have Paige. I have my work. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that Heather and Norman will spend the rest of their lives in prison, thinking about the man they underestimated. That's revenge, not healing. Maybe, but it's a start." After Rice left, Jonathan sat in his study and opened his laptop. He'd been approached by several publishers about writing a book, the full story of his infiltration and the case. He'd been putting it off, not sure he was ready. But tonight, with Paige safe upstairs and his enemies locked away, he started typing. The first line came easily. "I thought I knew my wife." Over the next several months, Jonathan poured everything into the book. Every lie Heather had told. Every manipulation. The fear he'd felt realizing his daughter was in danger. The cold calculation required to go back into that house and pretend everything was normal. The satisfaction of watching the trap close. He called it The Longest Con. It became a bestseller. Reporters asked if he'd ever trust anyone again. Jonathan's answer was always the same. "I trust my daughter. I trust the truth. Everything else is negotiable." 2 years after the trial, Jonathan received a letter from the prison. It was from Heather. He almost threw it away unread. But curiosity won out. "Dear Jonathan, I know you'll probably tear this up, but I'm writing anyway. Not to apologize. I'm not sure I even can for everything I did. But I want you to know that some of it was real. When I married you, it was an assignment. Get close to the journalist, monitor him, make sure he never got too close to our operations. It was supposed to be simple, but Paige changed everything. I never planned to actually get pregnant. It complicated everything. And watching you be a father, watching you love her so completely, it made me realize what I was. What I'd become. I should have left then. Should have walked away and let you both have normal lives. But I was in too deep. My father controlled everything. And by the time I realized I wanted out, it was too late. The plan to kill you and Paige, that was never mine. That was all Norman. I fought him on it. The texts you saw, the ones where I seemed to agree. I was buying time, trying to figure out how to get you both to safety without exposing our organization. I failed. You were smarter than all of us. And now I sit in this cell every day thinking about the life I destroyed. Your life. Paige's. My own. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that when I said I loved you, somewhere beneath all the lies, I meant it. H. Jonathan read the letter 3 times, then burned it in the fireplace. He didn't believe her. Maybe some of it was true. Maybe she had struggled with the assignment. Maybe Paige's birth had complicated things. But the texts were clear. The plan to murder them was real. And Heather had participated, however reluctantly. Besides, it didn't matter anymore. True or false, Heather Compton's words were just more lies in a life built on deception. Jonathan returned to his work, to raising Paige, to building a life based on truth. The book's success led to speaking engagements, a documentary deal, and opportunities Jonathan had never imagined. He used the platform to expose other criminal organizations, to teach people how to spot cons, to help victims of fraud rebuild their lives. Paige flourished. She'd been accepted to Columbia's journalism program with a full scholarship. The night before she left for college, father and daughter sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over Portland. You ever think about her? Paige asked quietly. Jonathan knew she meant Heather. Sometimes. More about what could have been if she'd been real. Less about what actually was. I used to wonder if any of it was real. If she ever actually cared about us. Does it matter? Paige thought about that. No. I guess not. We're real. What we have is real. That's enough. Jonathan put his arm around his daughter, and for the first time in years, felt something like peace. Yes, he agreed. That's enough. Years would pass. Jonathan would write more books, expose more criminals, build a legacy based on truth and justice. Paige would graduate with honors, follow in his footsteps as an investigative journalist, and together they'd crack cases that made national headlines. Norman Collier died in prison 7 years into his sentence, a heart attack that the guards found too late. Jonathan felt nothing when he heard the news. Heather remained imprisoned, her requests for appeal consistently denied. Jonathan heard through Rice that she'd become a model prisoner, helping other inmates learn to read, attending every rehabilitation program available. He never wrote back to her letters, never visited, never acknowledged her existence beyond the necessary legal proceedings. Because in the end, Jonathan Welch had done more than expose a criminal organization. He'd reclaimed his life, protected his daughter, and proven that intelligence and determination could triumph over deception. The con artists had lost. The truth had won. And that was the only ending that mattered. On the 10th anniversary of that Sunday morning, when Paige had shown him her phone, Jonathan stood at his daughter's wedding. She'd found someone good, someone honest, a civil rights lawyer who treated her like gold. As Jonathan walked Paige down the aisle, he thought about the journey that had brought them here. The fear, the anger, the satisfaction of justice served. The long nights rebuilding their lives. The slow, steady return to normalcy. I'm proud of you, he whispered to Paige. So incredibly proud. She squeezed his arm. We did it, Dad. We survived. No. Jonathan corrected gently. We won. And in the end, victory was sweeter than any revenge could have been. Because Jonathan Welch hadn't just destroyed his enemies. He'd built something better in the ruins they'd left behind. A life based on truth, a relationship with his daughter that nothing could tarnish, and the unshakable knowledge that he'd been underestimated for the last time. The woman who'd called herself Holly Weber had thought she was running the con. But from the moment Jonathan figured out the truth, he'd been writing the story. And in his version, the good guys won, the bad guys paid, and the truth set everyone free. It was the best ending he could have written. And unlike Heather's lies, every word of it was true. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.